Hi everybody. This video is developed to introduce you to an evaluation table. And an evaluation table is also known as an evidence table. And what's important to know, well, number one, what is an evaluation table? An evaluation table is a summary of the evidence that you have compiled while you've gone out and searched the literature to be able to support your PICO question or find answers, to help you find some answers to your PICO question as well. Evaluation tables are very important because it organizes your data in a clear fashion, and it brings out the salient points of the research, whether it's research evidence or non-research evidence. But you will bring the data or the information that you have placed into the evaluation table over to your literature review. So by developing a solid evaluation table, that really is important to be able to bring it over very quickly into your literature review and develop a solid literature review. Okay, so before we move on, very quickly, a part of the evaluation table, which I'm going to show you the template here in a moment, is the variables. And when we are talking about quantitative research, you really need to have an understanding of the variables. And I know you're getting that in your statistics course as well. But the independent variable is also known as an explanatory predictor or a covariate variable. And it is the variable that is being controlled or manipulated. It is the variable that is being introduced into the study to see if it impacts an outcome. So this would be your treatment variable or a program intervention variable. So things like that. But that's the independent variable. The dependent variable is also known as the outcome variable. It is the variable that is affected by the independent variable. So it's the effects or the outcome on the independent variable. So if we had the research question of how does self-management, patient education affect A1Cs on persons with type 2 diabetes, if we looked at that, the independent variable would be the education, and the dependent variable is the A1Cs. The education, the self-management patient education, is the variable that we are introducing into the persons with type 2 diabetes to see what outcome it has on A1Cs. I think variables, it can be a hard concept to grasp, so we want you to do the best you can do in your evaluation table. But this link right here is it's a great link. It presents a very succinct way in describing the variables. And also, because you do talk about it a little bit, I know you do with the research, and we talk about it in the evidence-based practice class, is the level of your tools, the evidence of the tools, such as the nominal measurement, the level of measurement, that's what I'm trying to say. So, such as the ratio, nominal, interval data, and ordinal. And this link also has a nice way to describe that as well. Okay, when we're talking about quantitative and qualitative research, those are the two broad types of research. There is a third also known as mixed methods, and it's actually pretty complex and it takes a while to do. But if you have a mixed methods study that you are presenting or evidence that you want in your evidence table, that's great. Use it. I try to identify it as mixed methods. If you have any questions, you can always ask your instructor. Quantitative research can be described broadly as descriptive and experimental, but it can be broken down further, and I think this is probably more important to remember. It can be broken down into descriptive, correlational, quasi, and experimental. And remember, when we talk about experimental, you're talking about things like random controlled studies. That's where we randomize the population, whereas with the others, descriptive, correlational, and quasi, we don't do that. A single research design, in fact, may have the qualities of several of these different research types. So a quantitative research can be a descriptive, correlational, quantitative study. I think the important thing to remember, the goal of quantitative research is to be able to generalize the results to the entire population. And that, can mean the world. So if you are out there in your literature and you're seeing a study on maybe Japanese people, you need to pull you can pull that study over and utilize it, because that is that's the one thing with quantitative research, is we want to be able to generalize those findings. And think numbers with quantitative studies. You will see statistics described for the results. That tells you right off the bat that it's a quantitative study. Okay, qualitative studies, there's several different types, but the common categories are ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, field, and narrative. And when you're talking in your evaluation table, or when you're writing in your evaluation table what type of a research study it is, we want you to make sure you write qualitative with a grounded theory approach, or qualitative study with a phenomenological approach. And you should be able to see that. I mean, if they don't write that, which is highly unusual, then it's very hard for you to be able to tell what approach they used. But even with the quantitative studies in your evaluation table, instead of just writing quantitative, try to break it down a little bit further. Is this a quantitative correlational study? Okay, do the best you can do. For sure, you need to identify qualitative and quantitative, but also look at the subtypes as well. With qualitative, the goal is to develop a deeper understanding of phenomena. And research in this design can't be quantified. It's about the attitudes, the beliefs, the attributes, and you're really thinking in words, okay? So measurements, I want you to think about this as another piece of the evaluation table. The measurements is the scale, the instrument, the tool that is being used to measure the data. And really here what we're talking about is quantitative studies. So we're really looking at the level of data, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio data. And that link I already showed you discusses that, but as does your book. Melnick also discusses that. The thing that's really important, though, is there's a reliability question in the table. Tools need to be valid and reliable, and I know that you have already discussed that. But if a tool is reliable, which means does it have internal consistency from item to item? One of the measures that we look about that we look for with reliability is Cronbach's alpha. And a good study should always address a Cronbach's alpha, and that number should be 0.7 or greater to ensure the tool is reliable. But it's very rare that you will see a quantitative study when they discuss the scale, the measurement, the instrument, whatever, and they don't mention Cronbach's alpha. So that's something to really keep a lookout for, and that's something you'll need to put in the evaluation table as well. If the article doesn't state it, you need to state that in your evaluation table. Okay, so this is the evaluation table or evidence table. Shouldn't use both of those words. But we're going to go through 3 articles utilizing this template, and this is what you're going to use for your development of your your evaluation table. So this first group this first category is just citation. It's the authors, the date of the publication, the title. It's a cut and paste. That's great to do that. Make sure you look at the assignment descriptions so you know specifically what it is you need that needs to be in each of these columns, okay? The second one is the problem or the purpose of the evidence, whether it's qual, quan, or non-research. What's the design or the method? So if this is a quantitative correlational study, this is where you're going to write it. If it's a qualitative phenomenological study, that's where you're going to write it. If it's a QI project, write that. Or it might be something else that we've talked about in your readings, other non-research evidence as well. In the sample or the setting, actually you need to address both of these. What was the number of participants, like N equals 118? What were the characteristics? Was it a all-female vulnerable population that were seen in a federally qualified healthcare clinic? So you're just mentioning the number, what are the characteristics, and where, what is the setting, where are these Where's the sample coming from or being surveyed? The other thing is attrition rate. Sometimes you're going to notice in an article it may say that, we started out with N 529, but in the end the sample was N 429. And just mention why. Sometimes people, well, they die during a study, or, they drop out. That's the difference with research, is you have the option as a participant to always drop out. And that's a little bit different from the QI studies. Okay, major variables. We just talked about the variables. Try to identify your independent and your dependent variables. The measurement of the major variables. All this is what scale did they use and what is the reliability. Okay? Data analysis. If this is a quantitative study, you need to talk about, you're going to be talking in numbers, okay? You're going to be talking about that they maybe use SPSS. They mention these types of things. And they use paired t-testing, or they use multiple linear regression. They will tell you this, so you need to write it down. They should tell you this. If they didn't, it's a, crappy study. And the same with the method for the qualitative. How did they analyze the data? The study findings, quantitative is always stats, so you're going to write your statistical findings. Think about that p-value. That's really important to get in there. And with qualitative, we really look at themes. So talk about some of those themes. What happens here is whenever you have a purpose or a problem right here, this should tie right on up over to this one. This was the problem, and this is what they found. Okay? So the appraisal worth to practice, this is where you just talk briefly. You don't use full sentences, and you'll see that in the assignment directions. You'll talk briefly about the strengths of the limitations of the study, and I mean briefly. Okay. Was there a risk or harm in the intervention? And the biggest thing is, if there was, any research should have ethical, the IRB, and they should mention this as well, okay? And can you use this? Would this study be applicable in your practice? Just mention you think it would and why, very briefly. Level of evidence rating, I'm going to talk about that in a minute here, but that's where you will place that number. Okay, just quickly, speaking, of the level of evidence, we rate the evidence if there's a hierarchy to our evidence, whether it's research and non-research. And I want you to utilize one of these three schemas to rate that evidence. This is something you need to read, this article, a couple pages. It really helps you understand that. And anyways, just go from there and use one of the schemas to rate your level of evidence. Okay, so that's it. We're going to go on to the next video and look at these types of things.